"Mom, the table's already full. You can head over there. McDonald's would suit you better." My daughter-in-law's voice slid out light as a well-honed blade. She smiled and pushed the menu back toward the server. I stood still in the middle of the Copper Finch, the swankiest restaurant in this city, where my eldest son was throwing a promotion party. The clink of silverware on plates went quiet. The restaurant's warm lights caught the wine glass in his hand, glittering like an insult. I laughed. A dry, deep sound, like pulling a pin. I walked past them straight to the host stand and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Call the manager for me. Tell him Iris Caldwell is here to claim the owner's table." When Elliot, the restaurant manager, hurried out and put his hand on my shoulder, the whole room turned. She had no idea every glass of wine here poured straight into my pocket, and tonight I'd pour the rest right over her head. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Iris Caldwell, 70 years old, living in the suburbs of Charleston, South Carolina. I've worked my whole life with cracked hands, from hotel room attendant at a roadside place to warehouse manager for a supermarket chain. I used to believe a mother's love could cover any wound, that if I sacrificed enough, the kids would understand. But life isn't a fairy tale. I lost my husband early, lost my youth to overnight shifts, and in the end, lost the respect of the very children I raised. People saw a skinny old woman in worn-out shoes, but they didn't know that under this wrinkled skin is a woman who survived on grit, brains, and a secret big enough to buy my dignity back. I still remember the moment my daughter-in-law Aubrey's eyes shifted from triumphant to frozen. She sat there, in a room shimmering with candlelight, her smile stuck halfway on red lips. Beside her, my eldest, Grant, cleared his throat. He looked around, trying to act like nothing was happening, but I could see the way. His jaw locked, his hand whitening around the wine glass. Next to them was Mason, my younger son, head down like he wanted to disappear, and his girlfriend, Tessa, darting her eyes around, unsure where to place herself in the storm about to break. I went straight to Elliot, a man in a black suit, eyes bright behind his glasses. He bowed slightly, his familiar, respectful smile in place. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, "so good to see you. Your table is ready." The room fell silent. I could feel dozens of eyes on me, half surprised, half disbelieving. I tilted my head and smiled. "Good. I think I'll sit at the center table tonight. The light's better there." Elliot nodded immediately. "Yes, ma'am, owner." That word owner dropped into the air like a stone into a still pond. I heard the whispers ripple out. Grant stared at Elliot, then at me, like he'd just realized the mother he'd always thought was a poor old woman was someone entirely different. "Owner," Aubrey repeated, her voice trembling, eyes locked on me. I answered with a calm smile. "Oh, you probably didn't know. This restaurant belongs to Caldwell Holdings, and I'm the controlling shareholder." I paused, looked her straight in the eye. "So if I want a seat here, trust me, no one will dare say no." Elliot led me to the largest table in the room, white linen, candlelight glinting off crystal. I sat down slowly and set my leather purse on the table. When the server poured wine, I turned and smiled toward my son's table. "Please send a bottle of Chateau Margaux 2010 to the table over there," I said. "Consider it a gift to mark this memorable family evening." The server nodded, and I watched the color drain from Aubrey's cheeks. The whole restaurant went pin-drop silent, with only soft jazz floating through air tight enough to snap. Grant stood, pulled out his chair, and walked toward me. He tried to lower his voice, but I heard every word. "Mom," he said, "what are you doing? People are watching." I looked up, my calm so steady it threw him off balance. "It's all right, honey," I said. "They're just learning a small lesson. Never belittle the person who taught you to stand up straight." He clamped his mouth shut and glanced back at his wife. Aubrey bit her lip, forcing a smile, but I saw her hands shaking. Mason sat petrified, and Tessa only tilted her head, eyes full of sympathy, whether for me or for them, I couldn't tell. When the appetizers arrived, I glanced at Elliot and gave a small nod. He understood, signaling staff to set up 2 side tables near me. I opened my purse and took out my phone and a thick envelope. Inside were investment files, legal papers, ownership contracts, everything proving that this poor cleaning lady had quietly bought the Copper Finch 15 years ago. I hadn't planned to show it off, but tonight was different. Tonight I wanted them to see the woman they'd looked down on no longer needed their approval. I tapped my finger lightly on the table, cueing Elliot. He stepped to Grant's table and spoke loud enough to carry. "Mr. Grant, per Mrs. Caldwell's instruction, tonight's entire bill will be covered by the house. Congratulations on your promotion at this property owned by your family." A few soft laughs rose from nearby tables. I didn't turn around, I just lifted my glass, brushed it to my lips, and said quietly enough for Elliot to hear, "Nice opening." He bowed his head. "Would you like me to prepare the documents?" I nodded. Let them know tonight comes with a main course and the truth. I looked around the room, men in suits, women in silk dresses, light sliding through their wine glasses. All of it so familiar to me, because I'd chosen every detail with Elliot when we designed this place. The dark wood, the jazz, the lighting that flatters without flaunting. Only tonight I was in the right seat, and they weren't. I watched Aubrey try to look composed, taking a sip of wine, but her hand was shaking so badly, a few red drops flecked the tablecloth. Grant leaned in, whispered something, and they both stood, ready to leave. "I don't think we're done, son," I said, voice low but clear. "You invited me here, and now you plan to walk out of a dinner your own mother owns? That's rude." Grant stopped and turned back, his face flushed. I saw his eyes flicker between anger and shame. "You don't need to make a big scene, Mom," he murmured. "We can talk in private." "No," I said. "You chose to humiliate me in public, so I'm choosing the truth as our witness." No one said another word. Aubrey stared down, fists clenched around her purse straps. Mason looked from me to his brother, clearly wanting to speak but lacking the nerve. I looked at all 3, the children I'd stayed up nights for, covering every meal, every tuition payment, every medical bill, and saw something painful but crystal clear. Unconditional love had turned them into ingrates. Elliot returned and handed me another envelope. Inside was Caldwell Holdings' quarterly report and the list of shares in other properties, hotels, cafes, even the buildings they were renting. I set the envelope on the table and laid my hand over it. "Elliot," I said, "I think it's time. Get the files ready. I want to announce ownership to the press, right here at this table." He bowed. "Yes, Mrs. Caldwell." I looked back at my sons, took one last sip of wine. "I didn't come here to eat dinner," I said calmly. "I came to reclaim the dignity you took from me." The room seemed to freeze. Aubrey looked up, eyes wet, but before she could speak, I set my glass down and smiled slightly. "Now," I said, "let's see who really doesn't belong here." That night, as I walked out of the Copper Finch, I knew one thing for certain. The role of gentle mother had closed. The curtain had fallen, and Act 2 of my life justice had only just begun. I was born in a small town outside Charleston, where summers smell like salt and pine sap. My life, simply put, is a string of years carried by cracked hands and a stubborn belief that endurance is the only way to be loved. I married at 27 to Harold Caldwell, a quiet mechanic who loved me with a plain, sturdy kind of love. We didn't have much, but enough to believe happiness could be built if we worked hard. Then, one March morning, he went to fix a car for a friend and never came back. A highway accident. And within minutes I became a widow at 33 with 2 children. Grant was 8, Mason was 5. No insurance, no savings, just 2 kids, and a rental house tucked between old warehouses. I remember the first day I knocked on doors for work. People looked at me, a small woman with a face still swollen from crying, and said, "We just need a room cleaner, no degree required." I nodded. That was my first job, and the one that shaped my whole life. Housekeeping at a motel off the highway, where the rumble of semis ran through the sleepless nights of those with no other choices. I did that for 25 years. 25 years breathing bleach, bending over cold tile floors, washing sheets soaked with strangers' sweat. In winter, my hands cracked from chemicals. In summer, my back hurt so much I had to hold my breath just to bend and pick up a dime. But I didn't complain. Every morning I got up at 5 a.m., made instant coffee, set out cereal for the kids, and asked a neighbor to watch Mason. At night I came home, cooked the simplest dinner, listened to Grant's school stories, and put Mason to sleep with worn-out tales about the father they barely remembered. I thought I was strong until the day my mother had a stroke. The hospital demanded a deposit of $5,000, and I had only $600. I called everyone, new churches, odd jobs, friends, but no one had it. By the time I scraped the money together, she was gone. I remember sitting in the hospital hallway, the bill shaking in my hand, and swearing to myself, from now on, money will never decide my dignity again. After that, I started paying attention to numbers. At the motel, there was a long-term guest, Samuel Green, a retired accountant. He'd sit and read ledgers, mumbling tax notes like he was talking to himself. I picked up a few tricks. I asked questions. He laughed. "You want to learn? Sit down." So every night after I finished rooms, I sat with him and learned how to record expenses, calculate profit, and read a basic balance sheet. It was the first time I saw the world through numbers, not just sweat. I began keeping books for myself. Every tip, every spare dollar I made had a line in a small, cracked leather notebook. I logged how many rooms I cleaned, how much I spent on the kids, and always kept a little column called Future. At first, it was a few dollars a month, then a few dozen, then a few hundred. When it grew enough, I put it into municipal bonds, safe, low risk, slow but steady. I told no one, not even my children. One night, while I was wiping down the front desk, a man a bit younger than me walked in Elliott Park. He rented a space for a small, late-night coffee shop about to open. He asked, "Want to pick up an overnight cleaning shift? I need help." I said yes, not for the money, but out of curiosity. His cafe stayed open all night for truckers, students, and insomniacs like me. Elliot was kind, grateful, and sometimes let me try pulling espresso shots. When the shop started getting steady customers, I worked up the nerve to say, "If you want to open another location, I have a little savings." He smiled and asked how much. I said a number so small he thought I was joking. But he took it. 3 years later, the cafe turned a profit, and I became his first outside shareholder. That was my first turning point. Then came the recession. A string of small restaurants went under. People ran, dumping equipment, leases, licenses. I remember Elliot saying, "Smart folks get scared. The stubborn ones end up rich." I don't know if I was smart, but I was stubborn. I used my savings to scoop up what others feared: old kitchens, busted bars, bad leases in average locations. I fixed them, sublet them, or sold them when things improved. Piece by piece, with caution and patience, it became something bigger. Elliot said, "You should form a company." I shook my head. "I'm just a cleaning lady." He laughed. "Then let them think that." And so Caldwell Hospitality Holdings was born, a shell company with me as controlling shareholder and Elliot as the public operator. I kept working at the motel, still wore the faded blue uniform, still cleaned rooms and took tips like always, but in my ledger, the numbers told a different story. I still remember signing my first contract to acquire a small property. My hands shook so badly I had to grip the pen with both hands. Elliot said, You know, someone can own a whole building and still clean it. The difference is now you get to decide who cleans with you." I laughed. No one at the motel knew the woman mopping floors owned 2 cafes and a profitable bakery, and through it all I thought only of Grant and Mason. I paid for private school on time. I bought Grant his first car when he got into college. I helped Mason with a security deposit when he landed his first job. I never begrudged $1, never asked for payback. I just wanted them to have what I never did. But the older they got, the farther they drifted. When Grant started dating Aubrey, a woman who spoke like she was judging the world, I saw something in his eyes. Shame. He didn't want me stopping by his apartment, didn't want friends to know his mother was a cleaning lady. Once, when I brought him homemade pastries, he glanced around and said softly, "Mom, next time you can just mail them." I smiled and nodded. The words were a small knife, not enough to kill, but deep enough to cut. Mason was gentler, but weak. He never opposed his brother, just silently agreed. I knew they loved me, but their love was mixed with embarrassment, like I was proof of a past they wanted to forget. I wasn't angry, I just watched, played dumb, stayed quiet, and remembered. When the Copper Finch opened a fine dining European place Elliot and I invested in, I still wore an apron and checked for dust in corners. Elliot asked, "Do you want your name public?" I shook my head. "No. Let them think I'm staff." He was surprised, but I knew the day would come when that would save me. I kept that secret for 15 years. No one knew. No one needed to know. I lived simply, went to work, went home, and paid my grandkids' school fees. Sometimes, seeing Grant step out of a luxury car, shaking hands with clients, or Mason in a sharp suit, I smiled, half proud, half regretful. They had everything I dreamed for them, but had lost the one thing I couldn't buy back: respect for their mother. So when Aubrey said that night that McDonald's suited me better, I didn't get angry. I just felt the story had reached its ending. Because in the bag I carried that evening, along with my wallet and keys, were the ownership papers for the Copper Finch. And I knew it was time to use them to take back what they'd long forgotten: a mother's dignity. Grant married Aubrey in a blaze of autumn gold. The wedding was at a fancy golf club, every flower on the tables imported from Italy, the white dress costing nearly as much as the little apartment I rented when I was newly widowed. I remember standing in the last row, wearing a light blue dress pressed smooth, holding wild daisies. When I walked into the hall, one of Aubrey's friends asked if I worked there, because you look more like staff than a guest. I just smiled. Grant didn't hear it, and if he had, he'd probably just frown slightly and pretend it wasn't about him. Aubrey grew up in a middle-class family trying hard to look upper-class. Her father was a teacher, her mother an office worker, but they lived off reputation more than reality. From the first time she stepped into my home, she showed it, eyes scanning, comments that sounded like suggestions but were really criticism wrapped in silk. "Your house is a bit old but cozy," she said, fingers brushing the chipped paint on the doorframe. I answered, "Old is right, I spent the money on tuition for the kids." She smiled, but her eyes were cold as steel. Mason, my younger one, was the opposite of his brother kind, a little clumsy, and always avoiding conflict. His girlfriend, Tessa Brooks, a music teacher with a voice soft as spring wind, always bowed her head when greeting others. I liked Tessa. In her eyes I still saw something I no longer found in many young people: sincerity. But Tessa was afraid of Aubrey. Every time the family gathered, she sat perched on the edge of a chair, smiling stiffly like one wrong word would get her pushed off the table. I know how thin the line is between help and dependency. All my life I only wanted my kids to have it good. But the more I gave, the more they treated me like an endless supply, not a person. When I sent money to help Mason fix his car, he stopped saying, "Thank you." When I covered part of the condo down payment for Grant and Aubrey, they said, "You're so generous." as if I'd merely fulfilled an obligation, not offered love. Then one day, they said I should rest. The way they said it was gentle. The meaning was heavy as stone. "Mom, Aubrey and I have been thinking," Grant said one Sunday afternoon. "This house is too big for you. You're alone, no one to help. We just want you to be safer." Aubrey added, voice smooth as butter. "There's a new assisted living center, very nice. Shared kitchen, cleaning staff. You wouldn't have to work yourself anymore." I sat and stirred my tea. In my chest, the words they used pricked like tiny needles. Too big, alone, safer, shared kitchen, all just different ways to say the same thing. "You make us ashamed." I asked slowly, "What are you more afraid of, me falling down the stairs, or me walking into your party in an outfit that doesn't match the red carpet?" Aubrey gave a thin smile, glanced at Grant, then said, "Please don't take it the wrong way. We're only thinking about you." I nodded. "Right, I get it." I didn't argue. I just wanted to see what they'd do when I stopped giving. The next week, I lost my job. In truth, I quit on purpose, using layoffs as the excuse. I told no one. I wanted to run a simple test. When they think I have no income, how will they react? A week went by. No one asked if I was okay. On the 8th day, Grant texted, "Mom, I found a few great places. Close to us, very clean assisted living, friendly staff. I'll send you the links. You'll have friends your age, less lonely." I read it and smiled sadly. Right after came Aubrey's text, "Mom, I know you love to cook, and they have a shared kitchen there. You can make your favorite dishes for everyone. That lifestyle really fits you." A minute later, Mason called. His voice was small, like he was afraid of what he was saying. "Mom, I think he's right. You live alone, we worry. They have caregivers there, and we'd feel better." I wasn't angry at Mason. "He's just weak." I was angry at the indifference baked into how they talked. Not one person asked, "Do you want to?" All I heard was, "We think." I didn't answer right away. That evening, I sat at the dining table staring at 2 empty chairs. One was Harold's. The other used to be Grant's when he was little. I remembered my 10-year-old, still calling me Mommy, holding my hand on the way to school. I remembered Mason, always scared of the dark, needing to sleep in my arms. Where did those children go? Who taught them that convenience matters more than family, and that the woman who gave them life can be arranged out of the way? My phone buzzed. A new message. "Tessa. Miss Iris, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have stayed quiet when they said those things. I know they didn't mean well. I just didn't know what to do." I stared at the shaky words and, for a moment, I saw that young woman again, with the gentle smile and helpless eyes. I didn't blame Tessa. At least she still had a heart. I picked up my phone and hit record. When Grant called back to go over details about assisted living, I let the recorder run. When Aubrey sent more links, cheaper places that are still clean, I saved those too. I didn't know exactly how I'd use this evidence, but my gut said, keep it. The next day, Mason stopped by with a fruit basket. He tried to act cheerful, but his eyes kept sliding away. "Mom, I know you're upset, but I thought about it, and he has a point. Living alone isn't good for your health." I looked at him for a long time, then asked one question. "Have you ever thought about your own son saying that to you someday?" He dropped his head. No answer. That night, I opened my laptop and replayed every recording. Grant's voice smooth and confident, like a boardroom. Aubrey's soft but cold. Mason's timid, afraid. I listened over and over until my tears dried. Then I closed the laptop and wrote one line on a small piece of paper. "If you choose to sell your mother cheap, I will reprice you." I folded the note and tucked it into the notebook where I used to log every tip. Just like when I rebuilt my life after losing everything, I knew it was time to start another plan. But this time, not to make money, to take back my own worth. Outside the window, the streetlight washed the eaves with long stripes of pale glow. I sat still, hands wrapped around a cold cup of tea, feeling something form quietly inside me, a hard, clean resolve, not of a weak mother, but of a woman who finally understands that kindness only holds value when people respect it. The air inside the Copper Finch that night was thick, like fog before a storm. The background music cut out, only spoons tapped softly against wine glasses and breaths came in shallow little waves. I sat at the big table in the center, under the crystal chandelier, where the light fell and made my skin look like it was wrapped in a calm, cold sheen. Elliot, the restaurant manager and my partner for 15 years, caught on instantly. He signaled for staff to bring out the set of rare wine glasses from the private cellar, the kind the restaurant only opens when the owner asks. The sommelier bowed and asked, "Mrs. Caldwell, what would you like to have?" I looked up, voice steady. "Open the Chateau Lafite 2005. I think tonight deserves it." The room shivered. A few diners murmured. They knew that bottle was reserved for investors, people on an internal list one my son definitely had never seen. Elliot gave a small nod, and a few minutes later the cork popped like the first shot of a starting gun. I lifted my glass and looked over at the other table. Grant and Aubrey frozen like statues. Mason's head hung low. Tessa gently held his hand, eyes worried. I gave a thin smile and raised my glass toward them. "An appetizer from Caldwell Holdings," I said clearly, making sure those around us could hear. The server nodded, then placed a plate of salmon tartare at their table with a quiet explanation. A gift from the restaurant's owner, Mrs. Iris Caldwell. Grant was stunned. I saw his gaze wobble, then he tried a strained smile like it was a joke. "Mom, are you a shareholder here?" he asked, voice rough. I set my glass down and answered, slowly, "No, son, I'm the owner." Their table went dead quiet. Aubrey looked up, her voice cracked, composure gone. "Where did you get the money?" I leaned forward, so the light hit my face and spoke softly, but with steel. "From all those hours I spent mopping floors while you hid your face if you saw me on the street. From the tips I saved instead of buying new clothes, from sweat, from swallowing pride, and from the foolish belief that love would keep you from forgetting where you come from." Mason dropped his knife. Metal clanged hard in the stunned room. Tessa startled, then laid her hand over his, a small gesture filled with worry and a kind of pity I hadn't felt from anyone in our family for years. I turned to Elliot and whispered, "It's time." He nodded and walked toward the door, where 2 food journalists were waiting. Rumors about the anonymous owner of the Copper Finch had circulated in restaurant circles for years, but no one had ever seen her. Now, as Elliot led them in and camera flashes popped, every eye in the room fixed on me. "Mrs. Caldwell," the woman reporter stepped up, voice trembling with excitement. "Are you the founder of Caldwell Holdings?" I nodded. "I'm just a cleaning woman who believed good meals could rescue people from their weariness. Turns out, I could cook more than dinner. I could cook my own future." I took an envelope from my bag, opened it, and spread photocopies of ownership documents on the table, share purchase agreements, leases, tax registrations. Flashes kept firing. Elliot stood behind me, silent and solid like a wall. Grant tried to cut in, but his voice caught. "Mom, why didn't you tell us?" I met his eyes. "Because I wanted to know if, one day, I had nothing left but these old hands, would you still think I deserved a seat at your table?" I paused, then said each word clean and clear. "Now I know the answer." Aubrey turned away, face flushed, mouth moving without sound. She dabbed at her lips with a napkin, her hand shaking so hard she knocked over her water. It spread across the table in a long streak like the track of something collapsing. I didn't stop there. I signaled to Elliot for more documents. He set a cream-colored folder tied with a red ribbon on the table. I turned to the reporters and smiled. Here's the list of properties I own in this city: 4 cafes, 2 restaurants, and the office building that houses the bank where my son works. His branch leases space there. If this runs, readers might enjoy knowing that sometimes the person mopping the floor is the one who owns the ground you're standing on. Whispers rose across the room. A middle-aged man at a nearby table leaned to his wife. "It's a fairy tale flipped," I heard and smiled. "That's right," I said, loud enough for the room. "Except in this story, Cinderella doesn't marry the prince. She buys the castle." Soft laughter, a few claps from the corner. Elliot behind me gave a slight nod. He understood. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming honor. Grant lowered his head, voice tight. "Mom, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything, Grant," I replied. "Some apologies only count when they come with action, and I'm about to give you a chance to act." The evening slid on in awkward silence. The reporters left. The staff kept serving. But there was a new, quiet respect on their faces. When dessert came chocolate mousse I'd once helped develop. I looked at Grant and said slowly, "You know, dessert is always the most anticipated part of a meal. Because it's sweet, right? But tonight, ours is different." I set my spoon down and tilted my head. Tonight's dessert is consequence. I didn't raise my voice, but each word fell like a bell striking the silence of my whole life. Everyone reaches a limit, then it's time to stand up. I just chose to do it, under crystal lights. What about you? Have you ever had a moment like that? If you have, I'd like to hear your story in the comments. Someone out there might need to know they're not alone. No one spoke. Grant went rigid. Aubrey bit her lip. Mason sat frozen. Tessa bowed her head and squeezed her boyfriend's hand. I turned to Elliot. "Time to trigger phase 1, I said quietly, like an order. Elliot pulled out his phone and tapped out a few quick messages. I knew that simple motion sat on months of preparation, transfer papers, asset freezes on things I'd guaranteed for Grant, and covenant clauses on the Caldwell brand. Grant still didn't get it. He looked up, forced a laugh. "Mom, are you threatening us?" I answered softly. "No, I'm simply taking back what's mine. Like you clearing plates after washing dishes, I'm just clearing my life." A few guests left, but most stayed. Something in the air made them unwilling to miss it. They were watching a real play, where the nice mother costume came off and the woman they'd underestimated stepped onto the last stage of her life with her head high. Elliot returned and murmured, "It's done, Mrs. Caldwell. Everything's moved." I smiled and took the last sip of wine, oak blooming across my palate, the taste of victory, not loud, but deep and lasting. Before I left, I set the check on my son's table. Across the top, I wrote one line in black ink: "Love has no price, but respect does. From now on, I'll be setting everyone's value." I stood. The room was utterly quiet, only my heels ticking across the wood floor. As the door closed behind me, I heard Elliot tell the staff, "Make a note in the log. Tonight, the true owner of the Copperfinch appeared." Outside, a light wind moved down the street, carrying a hint of wine and charred wood. I took a long breath. The hurt in my chest was gone, replaced by a quiet pride. That night, I wasn't the mother pushed from the table. I was the woman who sat back down and flipped the whole table over. 3 days after the night at the Copperfinch, the city woke to a headline no one expected. "Son throws mother out of restaurant, turns out it's her restaurant." It was everywhere, from morning local news to social feeds I'd never cared about. A photo of me under the chandelier, wineglass in hand, calm eyes facing Grant and Aubrey, spread like wildfire. People talked, made memes, and named my story. The hidden owner, millionaire mom disrespected by her son, or simply Miss Iris and the lesson for the ungrateful. I said nothing. I let the public do what it does. What surprised me wasn't the reach, but the reaction. Thousands of comments. I wish my mom were alive so I could say thank you. This should be shown in ethics class. No one has the right to turn their mother into a burden. And of course, some said I went too far. She must be bitter. Who knows the truth? Maybe she staged it for revenge. I didn't need them on my side. I just needed the truth to stand. 2 weeks later, a news alert popped up. NCS Capital suspends branch manager Grant Caldwell pending ethics investigation. I wasn't surprised. Banks hate scandal, especially anything resembling elder abuse. Photos of Grant in a suit, hand over his face as he left the building, flooded the media. People said he'd lost approval authority. His work accounts were locked. A finance blog even asked, if he doesn't respect the person who gave him life, how can he be trusted with other people's money? Aubrey fell in her own way. The elite women's club where she was a vice president canceled her membership for damaging the organization's image. Her friends, the ones who used to toast her taste and class, went silent. A few sent faux sympathetic messages, but most were just fishing for gossip. She pulled off social media, deleting an Instagram full of trips and wine parties. Mason, the son I still thought had a little light left, tried to deny it all. In a private text he wrote, "Mom, people got it wrong. I never wanted you out of your house. I just don't know how to say things right." I read it, then opened my laptop. The recordings, message logs, and emails I'd saved were all there. His voice telling his brother, "You're right. If Mom would move, we'd worry less." The evidence was clear. When I sent it back, I added one line, "Don't worry, I don't need an apology. I just need you to remember that next time, silence has a price." After the uproar, I started shutting off the valves. Every financial support I'd quietly provided, monthly allowances, my grandkids' tuition, apartment rent, I stopped. The automatic transfers to Grant's bank were canceled. The secondary card Aubrey used for event shopping was frozen. I didn't announce it. I let the declined card notifications do the talking. I asked Elliot to help audit company expenses. Many assets that had been temporarily in my son's name, the downtown condo, the Audi I bought, so they could get around easily, all belonged to Caldwell Holdings. Elliot asked, "Do you want them back?" I said, "No. I just want them to know they never owned any of it." But there was one I did take back, the penthouse on King Street. I'd bought it over a decade ago, in the company's name to avoid attention. I'd been renting it out while I lived in the old place in the suburbs. Now I moved in living to my means, not hiding, not asking permission. The unit sits on the 20th floor, glass walls facing the Ashley River. That first night, I opened the balcony. Wind rushed in, smelling of salt. I made black tea, set it on the marble counter, turned on the soft gold lamp, and looked out at the city. In that quiet, I wasn't lonely. I was free. After 70 years, I was finally living not to be accepted, but to accept myself. When word got out I'd moved, a few major outlets asked for interviews. Some offered exclusive conversations, others pitched a documentary about the woman who built an empire in silence. I declined most. I chose one local station, the one that once ran a story on assisted living for low-income seniors, where I donated anonymously. I wanted to speak to ordinary viewers, not the sensational crowd. "We filmed in my kitchen, no script, no director," the interviewer asked. "Mrs. Caldwell, some say you're getting revenge." I smiled. "No, I'm not getting revenge. I'm carrying out justice." In families and in society, when people treat kindness as obligation, they forget what gratitude means. She was quiet for a moment, then asked, "So, what made you stop keeping quiet like before?" I looked straight into the lens. Silence is a language, but when it's used to step on you, it's time to speak with action. The segment aired on a Sunday night and got millions of views in 2 days. In it, I announced the Second Sunrise Fund meant to help seniors facing emotional or financial abuse from their own families. We provide legal help, temporary housing, and emotional support for the abandoned. Elliot agreed to serve as executive director. I'm the founding patron. When they asked why that name, I said, because for many people, life doesn't have just one morning. There can be a second sunrise if they're brave enough to open their eyes again. After the broadcast, public opinion split. Some praised, some criticized. Some said I was inspiring, others claimed I was showing off, turning pain into a platform. At a small press Q&A at the fund, a young reporter asked, "Do you think you went too far, costing your own children their jobs and reputation?" I paused, then answered low and steady, "There's no such thing as too far when that same hand has been stepped on. I didn't destroy their lives. I removed the privilege of living wrong without consequences." I glanced around and saw a few nods. Boundaries, I continued, are the first lesson of love. If people don't learn that, love turns into a rope that tightens around your neck. In the days that followed, I stopped hearing their voices in my head. No more McDonald's would suit you better, no more averted eyes when I walked into a room. The city stayed loud, social media kept churning out fresh stories, but I knew that somewhere, a few seniors were receiving their first support checks from the fund. I pictured them opening a window, letting the sunlight in, and knowing they still had another morning to begin again. Sometimes, at day's end, I sit by the glass and watch the lights shimmer on the water and think, life is like that restaurant. Anyone can pick a seat, but only people who understand the value of work and self-respect have the right to order for themselves. And Iris Caldwell, finally ordered the right dish: justice, not pity. A month after the headlines cooled, I sent invitations to all three of them, Grant, Aubrey, and Mason. Not a dinner invite, not a call for reunion. It was an internal civil summons, a working session with both sides' attorneys, in a private conference room on the third floor of the Copper Finch. No camera lenses, no online audience, just four walls, a few glasses of water, and air thick as a verdict. Elliot sat at the head of the table beside me, a stack of files in front of him. Across from us, Grant and Aubrey were neatly dressed, but the gloss was gone. Grant's suit no longer looked custom. Aubrey's dress looked like a rushed sale rack buy. Mason sat between them, head down. When they walked in, I didn't stand. I just checked the time. 10 o'clock sharp. "Thanks for being on time," I said evenly. "We're here to talk about debt." Grant drew a breath. "Mom, I've lost my job. I've lost everything. What more is there for?" "Thank you to take." I set a file on the table. "Oh, plenty. Here is the total I invested in you over the last 20 years. Tuition, weddings, down payments, cars, travel, and credit lines. Total, $1,280,000. I want it repaid." Aubrey scoffed, but the smile died when I slid a second sheet in front of her. Plus, compounded interest at 4.5% annually. The total to date is $1,790,000. The room went silent. Mason stammered, "Mom, we can't possibly pay that." I nodded lightly. "Exactly. Which is why you'll repay it in honor." Elliot opened the briefcase, took out 3 employment contracts, and placed one in front of each of them. Grant Caldwell, lead janitorial supervisor for the office division under Caldwell Holdings, 6 days a week, morning shift, $18 an hour. Aubrey Caldwell, evening prep cook at the Copper Finch, dishwashing and prep, $15 an hour. Mason Caldwell, maintenance and repairs for rental properties, full-time, $17 an hour. I enunciated every word, slowly, so no one could claim they misheard. These roles are not symbolic. Real work, real pay, standard policies like every other employee. You all report to your direct managers, not to me. Grant flushed and swallowed. "Are you trying to humiliate us?" I looked straight at him. No, Grant. I'm offering you jobs, something a lot of people would beg for. If you feel humiliated, that's your self-respect talking. Aubrey tapped the table. I can't believe you're doing this. You can refuse, I cut in. Just sign the paper next to it, permanently waiving any inheritance, including the life insurance I've designated. I'll forward a copy to your attorney. No one spoke. Mason kept his head down. Only Elliot's pen clicked softly against the table, his signal that he was waiting. I went on. You'll live in the worker housing complex in our system, on the east side. Single rooms, month-to-month leases. Each month, 70% of your wages will be deducted to repay the debt. If you complete 5 full years of continuous work, I'll forgive the remainder. Aubrey's mouth dropped. That complex, that's for blue-collar workers. That's right, I said, because I think it's time you learned what labor feels like. I turned my chair, opened my laptop, and projected the final clause on the screen. Additional commitments. Permanent waiver of all inheritance rights to assets, shares, or distributions from Caldwell Holdings. Non-disparagement and no false statements about Iris Caldwell on any platform. Mandatory volunteer work at Evergreen Haven Senior Home, 2 sessions per week. Monthly reflective journals submitted to HR. Elliot handed each of them a printed copy. If any term is violated, all prior evidence recordings, texts, images, and transfer documents will be released to the press. Mason looked up, voice rough. Mom, how long are you going to do this? Until you understand that respect isn't an inheritance, I said. It's full-time work. Aubrey bowed her head, shoulders shaking. Grant's fists clenched. In his eyes I finally saw what I'd waited years to see: real shame. Not over lost status, but from realizing his self-respect had never been built on anything real. I said nothing more, just slid the pen box toward them. Elliot checked the time and said, You have 30 minutes to sign. If not, we proceed to phase 2. Time dragged. The HVAC hummed overhead. The smell of fresh toner hung in the room. Everyone avoided each other's eyes. In the end, Mason picked up the pen first. He signed with a trembling hand, letters wobbling like he had no strength left. Good, I said softly. That's the first step of being an adult. Grant hesitated longer. He looked at Aubrey. She only lowered her face, tears spotting the contract. He finally grabbed the pen and signed quickly. Strokes sharp and forceful, like he needed to prove he still had agency. But when he finished, his eyes were red. Aubrey was last. She tried to wipe her tears, but her hand shook so much the ink smeared half a line. Elliot had to give her a fresh copy. When she was done, she looked up and asked, voice catching, Who do you want us to become after all this? People who can bow without losing their dignity, I said. The door eased open. A gentle voice. I'm sorry. May I join? It was Tessa. She stood in the doorway holding a folder, still a little flustered, but her eyes steady. I heard from Mason, she said, and if he has to work, I want to volunteer with him at the senior home. Not because I have to, because I think it's the right thing. I studied the young woman for a long moment. In that stifling room, she was a soft breeze. I nodded. All right, you don't need to sign anything. Your willingness is enough. Aubrey turned away, and Mason went still the first time I saw true gratitude in his eyes. When the paperwork was done, Elliot gathered the files into his case. I stood and looked at each of them. Starting today, I'm not a bank, and I'm not a soft landing. I'm the steward of this family's honor. I walked slowly around the table, stopping behind Grant. You used to think money was the measure of worth. Now you'll learn some debts are paid only in sweat. Then I looked at Aubrey. As for you, daughter-in-law, maybe you'll learn no one is born beneath you. Only the contemptuous make themselves small. Finally, I rested my hand on Mason's shoulder. And you, I don't need money from you. I need you to repay me by becoming a decent man. They sat still, 3 faces, 3 shades of guilt and contrition. I knew the road ahead would be long, but I also knew I'd done the right thing. Before I left, I turned back and spoke the last line, my voice low and final like a gavel. "From here on, Your Honor will pay the debt in place of my wallet." Elliot opened the door. Hallway light spilled in, illuminating once proud faces now lowered. I stepped out, lighter not for winning but for finally seeing justice show up not just in a courtroom, but at a family table that had forgotten gratitude. In the first week, HR reports hit my inbox on Monday morning. The sheet was short hours, output, minor violations, but to me, every line was a sign the lessons wheel had started to turn. Grant was assigned to office restrooms, the same halls he used to breeze past without a glance. Now he was cleaning the marble he once crossed in shiny Italian shoes. Elliot said on day one, his back hurt so badly he had to sit in the hallway, hand at his hip, sweat soaking his blue uniform shirt, but he didn't abandon the shift. He cleaned slower, clumsier, but he cleaned. At the end of the shift, he asked security to buzz the door. The guard, the one Grant used to ignore when he was a bank manager, just nodded. For the first time, Grant bowed in a real greeting, not the curt nod of a corporate man. I know this. Learning to bow isn't failure. It's the beginning of standing up properly. As for Aubrey, the one who said, "McDonald's would suit you better," she's now an evening prep cook at the Copper Finch. I checked the internal cameras. Beige uniform, hair tied up, no makeup. Under neon kitchen lights, her skin glossed with oil and her eyes looked oddly tired. Elliot said by day 3 she'd ditched the makeup entirely. The grease made her foundation run in streaks. That night, a group of guests recognized her, probably golf club acquaintances. They filmed her washing dishes, snickering. 15 seconds. Caption: "When the Ladies Club VP becomes Queen of Dishes." I watched it online and felt no joy. Humiliation is never a code. Lesson. Only awareness is real consequence. The next day, Elliot reported, Aubrey didn't call out. She arrived early, stood by the head chef, and learned portioning. She asked about shrinkage rates and wrote careful notes in a worn notebook. Maybe for the first time in her life, she understood the value of every slice of bread, every drop of oil on the floor. Mason worked maintenance at the rentals, a job people only notice when something breaks. The report read, Week 1 repaired 3 leaks, replaced 4th-floor bulbs. I pictured my son, once parked in front of a screen, now curled under a sink, hands greasy with grit. Maybe for the first time, he understood leaks are like mistakes. If you don't patch them fast, they seep in and ruin the foundation. One evening, Elliot sent a cafeteria camera still from worker housing. Mason sat alone at a corner table, a simple bowl of soup in front of him. I zoomed in. His hands were rough, calloused, with a small cut wrapped in tape. I remembered how those hands were once too soft to twist open a bottle cap. Now they looked like mine back then. In week 2, the storm hit earlier than I expected. An old friend from the bank spotted Grant cleaning lobby glass on Monday morning. He snapped a photo and dropped it in the group chat. Branch manager turned janitor? Life really is a movie. It leaked and spread company-wide. I don't need to imagine how Grant felt. I know that feeling being laughed at on the way down because I've been there. The difference is, no one filmed me. Aubrey didn't escape either. A food blogger posted a clip of her washing dishes with a snide line, "Fine dining, now hiring former Ladies Club royalty talk about a palate cleanser." The comments boiled over. Karma. Serves her right. When real life is dessert. I read them all but didn't take them down. They need to learn that the world's cold stare can be harsher than any scolding from a mother. Mason was the only one not dragged online. He paid another way. Every day he fixed leaks, carried his toolbox, and grabbed a cheap street-side meal. A staffer reported he often sat in the back of the night shift kitchen, watching servers run plates not with pity, but with a mix of curiosity and remorse. One night, when Aubrey cut her hand on a slipped knife, The person who ran to bandage her wasn't the head chef, it was Tessa. "I brought some bandages," Tessa said softly. "It's deep, but it'll heal." Aubrey looked at her and stayed quiet for a long time. Then she gave a small nod, lips moving like she wanted to say thank you but didn't know how to start. Maybe that was the first time she'd been treated kindly with no money or status involved. I didn't visit, and I didn't send messages. I just read the weekly management reports Elliot sent every Friday. He logged everything: hours, productivity, attitude, supervisor notes. I read every line and added no comments. I know feelings too soon can ruin rebirth. At first, other employees kept their distance. Then they began sharing night shift survival tips. Use vinegar to cut grease smell on your hands. Double knot trash bags to keep rats out. Share water when the heat gets bad. Small, ordinary things, but through them, my kids started learning the language of humility. By week 3, the air changed. Grant started greeting the guards by name, asking about their shifts. In his report, he wrote, "Didn't realize glass work could be this tiring. Now I get why people need a mid-shift break." Aubrey's HR journal was brief. "I thought I knew management. Turns out the first skill is listening. I'm learning to be quiet." After each repair, Mason left a note. "Pipe fixed. Thanks for the coffee. M." Staff pinned those slips to the internal board, reminders of small kindnesses. One morning, Elliot set a fresh report on my desk and smiled. "The gears are turning the right way, Iris." I looked out the window at the Ashley River flashing in the sun. "Right way isn't enough," I said. "They have to make the full turn." Elliot understood. He nodded and slipped out. I stayed with the files, feeling both calm and tender. I wasn't gloating. I was seeing the miracle of sweat, the thing people call dirty, but that washes away illusions. Outside, the sun was high. Somewhere in that light, my 3 children were still bent over their work. And I knew, slow as it was, late as it came, they were finally relearning how to be human, beginning with the calluses on their hands. Silver Pine's home sits on the city's northern edge, tucked in low hills of pine. That's where I chose for the 3 of them and Tessa to do their twice-weekly volunteer shifts. It's not too sad, but quiet enough to be a mirror. White-painted windows, weathered wooden benches, and the faint antiseptic smell, all of it makes an air only those who have grown old, who have waited, can truly understand. I didn't go with them. I read the weekly reports and journals, but Elliot, who often checked in, told me more than any line of text could. He said in week 1. Grant walked in fidgeting, like he was out of place. He wore his company uniform shirt, still crisp with the trace of expensive cologne, but when he saw Miss Renee in a wheelchair by the window holding an old photo frame, he stopped. "My daughter says she'll visit every spring," Miss Renee said, voice thin as thread. "It's been 3 years. I guess she's busy." No one answered. Grant just sat and looked out the window where pine needles fell in soft layers. Maybe in that moment he realized a mother's silence can last longer than winter. After that, he brought a chessboard. He played first with Mr. Hector, a retired math teacher, thin, sharp-eyed, voice like a blade. Elliot said Grant lost the first game clean. "Mr. Hector smiled kindly. "You're probably better at mopping than chess." Grant chuckled and scratched his head. Mr. Hector added, "Winning doesn't matter here, but don't keep your head down when you lose. Sometimes you have to look up to see the next move." It was the first time Grant lowered his head, not from shame, but to listen with his whole heart. Aubrey was assigned to the kitchen, preparing breakfast and dinner for nearly 50 residents. Simple work, but it takes care and patience. No fancy dishes, no banquet tables or crystal, just oatmeal, vegetable soup, and soft bread. On day 2, she made the oatmeal too thin, and Miss Margaret frowned, said it was bland. Aubrey went home, read recipes, tried again. Next morning she came an hour early, adjusted the porridge to individual portions, added a touch of almond milk and honey, fragrant but not cloying. When she served it, Miss Margaret tasted a spoonful and nodded. "Now that's good. You've got good kitchen hands, dear." A simple compliment. But Elliot said. Aubrey stood still for a few seconds, eyes pink. She couldn't remember the last time anyone told her, "Good job." Maybe never. Mason handled repairs. He swapped bulbs, tightened door hinges, patched pipes, small, repetitive tasks that demand patience. One afternoon, while he was on a ladder changing a hallway bulb, an elderly woman shuffled over and put a hand on his leg. "Thank you, son," she said, voice trembling. "Without the light, I fall all the time." Mason stopped. He looked down at her kind, wrinkled face, and in that moment the word son rang like something he'd lost. He smiled faintly, eyes wet. That night he wrote in his journal, "If Mom were here, what would I do differently? Maybe just listen instead of fix." Tessa, as usual, went with Mason. But she didn't just help him. One day she proposed a call-hour program, video calls for families every weekend. "Not everyone can come," she said, "but at least they can see each other, even if it's only through a screen." The idea was approved, and Grant himself was the first to show Miss Renee how to use the phone. When her daughter's face appeared on the screen, probably in another city, buried in work, she burst into tears. "Is that you, honey? I thought you'd forgotten me." The staff recorded the video and shared it on social media. Within days, it spread everywhere. Thousands of warm comments poured in, and many people started visiting their loved ones more often. I watched that clip on a small screen, my heart both warm and aching. In the fourth week, Silver Pines had a sad night. Mr. Hector, the one who played chess with Grant, passed away in his sleep. Peaceful, as a chess game halted mid-move. When Elliot called to tell me, I was silent for a long time. I knew that death would leave a mark not just in a medical file, but in the hearts of the young people who were just learning to cherish presence. The next day, my 3 children and Tessa stood by his empty bed. They didn't speak, they just stood there for a long time. Grant set the unfinished chessboard back in place. Aubrey brought the bowl of oatmeal he liked, and Mason tightened the loose bolt on the bed frame. No one asked them to do it. But small acts were their way of saying goodbye. That evening, they returned to their shifts, fewer words, steadier work. No complaints, no excuses. Only the sound of running water, the scrape of brooms, and even breathing in the quiet air. Elliot called me, his voice low. Maybe they've started to understand the price of absence. I didn't answer. I just opened the email with 3 small attachments, their individual reflection journals. I read in silence. Grant wrote, "When Mr. Hector blundered a piece. I went to fix the board, but he said, 'Don't. Leave it.' In life, you don't have to correct every bad move. Maybe you thought the same when you watched us mess up in silence." Aubrey wrote, "I used to think people cooked oatmeal out, think of duty. Now I know a spoon of oatmeal can be the last love note. I'm afraid of the day I have to cook for someone who can't eat anymore." Mason wrote, "Someone called me son today. My hands were dirty, but my heart felt cleaner than ever." My hand trembled by the end. Between the messy lines, I saw the first cracks in their armor of pride. Those cracks for me were worth more than any apology. I folded the journals and put them in a drawer. That night I wrote a short letter to Silver Pines, unsigned. Inside the envelope was just a check and a note. 4 new beds for those waiting for a place to be loved a second time. When Elliot took the task to deliver it, he asked, "Should I put your name on it?" I shook my head. No, some of the best things don't need an audience. Then I looked out the window. The evening light tilted through the trees, golden and soft like a day's last breath. I thought of silver pines, of the souls who had lived, the hearts learning to love, and my children now quietly becoming human again amid antiseptic air and the gentle laughter of old age. 3 months after their first volunteer shift at Silver Pines, I decided to do what I'd avoided for years: invite my children to dinner. No special reason, no birthday, no anniversary, just a simple meal where people who'd been broken could sit together without playing roles. I prepared everything myself. No lavish spread, no pricey wine like the parties they used to throw. On the table were roast chicken, a salad, and sweet cornbread, 3 dishes I made in our poorest years when we crowded around a little wooden table in a cramped apartment. When they arrived, all 3 stood awkwardly in the doorway like guests unsure they were welcome. Tessa came with them, holding a bunch of wild daisies. She stepped in first, her voice soft as a breath. "May I help set the table?" I smiled. "Of course, dear." My kitchen glowed warm under yellow light. No music, just the clink of a ladle on a pot and a hint of butter and garlic in the air. I saw Grant glance around. His eyes landed on the family photo on the wall, taken at a Charleston park 20 years ago when they were small. He walked over, touched the wooden frame, then came back and sat down quietly. When everything was set, I poured plain water into glass tumblers, no lemon, no ice. The table was quiet, just the sound of carving chicken and the cornbread's sweet smell hanging in the air. No one spoke for the first 10 minutes. I let it be. Silence is a language too. Grant broke it first. He set down his knife and took a long breath. "Mom," he began, voice rough, "I've been thinking a lot. I was afraid people would laugh at where I came from. I wanted to prove I was good enough, polished enough, so they'd forget who I am, that I'm the son of a woman who cleaned rooms." He gave a small, dry laugh and stared at his calloused hands. "Turns out, the more I tried to deny you, the more I erased the best part of myself." I said nothing. I just looked at him for the first time in years. My eldest wasn't avoiding my eyes or puffing himself up with pride. He was just a man learning to tell the truth. Aubrey sat next to him, hands clenched together. She looked toward the window, then spoke slowly. "I'm afraid of being poor, Mom. I grew up in a house where money was always short. I swore I'd never go back to that, so when I finally had a little, I clutched it until I turned mean." Her voice shook, eyes wet. "I thought money meant safety, but really, it just made me more afraid." I listened, feeling both ache and relief. Maybe this was the first time she'd been honest without fear of judgment. Then Mason lifted his head, eyes bright but tired. "I'm afraid of confrontation," he said. "My whole life I've avoided conflict. When Grant and Aubrey spoke, I stayed quiet. I thought silence kept the peace, but really I took the wrong side. And I know that hurt you." In his eyes I saw a different man, fewer words, more depth. Maybe those afternoons at Silver Pines taught him what took me a lifetime to learn. Silence can be a sin too. I set down the ladle and didn't answer with words. Forgiveness has never been about saying, "I'm not mad." If it's real, you feel it in actions. I stepped away from the table and turned on the tap. "Dinner's done," I said evenly. "Who wants to help me with the dishes?" Grant looked up, then stood first. "I will." Aubrey followed, rolling up her sleeves. Mason smiled slightly. "I'll dry this time." Tessa laughed soft and warm. We stood around the sink and split the work. Grant washed, Aubrey rinsed, Mason dried, and I put things away. No one bossed anyone. The water ran, plates clinked gently. A simple moment, but my heart warmed in a way I hadn't felt in years. The real family meal wasn't on the table. It was here, where everyone cleaned up together. When we finished, I dried my hands and looked at each of them. "If you want to stop early," I said, "you have my permission. Consider the lesson learned." Grant didn't hesitate. "No, Mom. I want to finish the year." Aubrey nodded. "Me too. Not because of the contract, because I need to see this through," Mason said quietly. "I think we still have a lot to learn." I stood there looking at the three of them. Their clothes still smelled like dish soap, their hands still rough, but in their eyes I saw what I'd waited for my whole life, the light of understanding. We ended the dinner without tears or grand promises. Just handshakes, awkward hugs, and a "see you next week, Mom." I walked them to the door. After their silhouettes slipped under the streetlights, I stood for a long time, listening to the night wind move through the trees. Back in the kitchen, the sink was empty, the dishes stacked neatly, a little steam still rising from the stainless steel. I sat down and exhaled, not a weary sigh, but the sound of someone putting down the last heavy load. That night I went to bed without reading the news or checking my phone. I stared at the ceiling and listened to the light rain outside. For the first time in years, I slept well, not because I felt safe, but because I knew my children, however lost they'd been, had started walking back toward decency. I dreamed of the old kitchen, the wooden table, and three little kids laughing around a plate of roast chicken. I heard my own voice in the dream, light as a breeze, "Eat up before it gets cold." And in that sleep I realized the real family table isn't set with gold, it's set with the truth. From August through December, the city slid into crisp sunlight, and I realized it wasn't just the street trees turning over. My three children were shedding old skins too. It wasn't flashy change, but the steady kind, like a factory rhythm or the slow breathing of someone waking from a long sleep. Grant, the son who used to sit behind a conference table with a tight tie and a voice tuned to authority, now wakes at 5 a.m. He still works the cleaning shift at Caldwell Holdings' main building, but stays after to study lodging management in a program for working adults. Reports say he brings a book to lunch, sits on the stairwell, eats a sandwich, and takes notes. One morning, Elliot sent me a sneaky phone shot. Grant standing in the grand lobby, teaching new staff how to polish glass with the light, not against it. His shirt was splashed with water, but his smile was bright. Beneath the photo, Elliot wrote one line, "People are relearning leadership from the lowest rung." I printed it and tucked it into my work notebook without telling anyone. Aubrey enrolled in a community culinary program with morning classes. She still works the evening prep shift at the Copper Finch, but now she knows how to hold a ladle, set heat, and keep quiet when corrected. Elliot said the head chef told him, "She's not afraid of hot oil anymore. I'd call that growth." In October, the restaurant ran an in-house contest. Each staffer cooked a Southern soul dish their way. Aubrey entered with a healthier gumbo, less oil, no butter, more vegetables and natural spices, tailored for seniors. When she heard I was sponsoring the contest, she looked flustered, but cooked with rare focus. Her gumbo won first prize, not for technique, for honesty and flavor. Asked how she felt. She said, "I used to think cooking was for servants. Now I know it's how people show love without words." The local paper quoted her, "No one brought up the old scandal. They only knew a woman learning to hold a ladle instead of a business card." Mason, the once weak younger son, surprised me most. His maintenance work now extends beyond worker housing. He built a standardized maintenance log, step by step for every device, with QR codes so staff can scan and timestamp completions. Elliot printed the plan and rolled it out across all Caldwell Holdings sites. Elliot said, "I've never seen him this confident. He doesn't keep his head down anymore unless he's measuring a pipe." In November, a resident in a high-rise he oversees gave him a hand-drawn sketch of a new streetlight, one Mason installed, casting just enough glow for seniors to walk safely at night. Under it was a scrawled line, "Thanks for making my block safer." Elliot brought the drawing to my office. I studied it and smiled. The boy finally understands usefulness is the most honorable degree. The internal reports I get each week have grown shorter. No complaints, just clean lines. Morning shift finished 20 minutes early. No safety violations. Performance at 108%. They're even volunteering for tougher shifts early mornings. Overnights. Weekends. Elliot asked why. Grant said, "I want to learn every Corner of your system, Aubrey said. I want to stay in the kitchen when the restaurant's quiet. That's when I can hear myself. Mason just smiled. I like the sound of pipes running steady. Makes me feel useful. I read those lines and felt warm, not proud. Exactly at peace. By year's end, Elliot came to my place with a proposal. Grant meets the threshold for the management cohort. I want him to run the third floor of the main office for 3 months. If he does well, we can bump him to shift supervisor. I was quiet for a few seconds. I've always believed power should follow responsibility. Now I think maybe trust is what teaches responsibility. I nodded. Do it. I won't interfere. Elliot smiled. You're practicing letting go? I said. Yeah. If I keep a grip forever, I'm no different than they were. In December, I went to the Copper Finch, not to supervise, but to eat. Aubrey handled the main course that day. When the gumbo came out, she stood at the pass and smiled at me. What do you think, Mom? I tasted a spoonful. A soft heat, balanced salt, shrimp, and celery coming through. It's good, I said, not because you seasoned well, but because you cooked with your heart. She smiled, tears slipping down and mixing with the sweat on her brow. Mason stayed in the field. This time, he was assigned to inspect newer buildings. He texted me a selfie, him by the lamppost he'd installed, sunset washing over a red brick facade. I saved the photo but didn't reply. Sometimes silence is the compliment. When Grant finished his course, the school sent me a thank you note. Said he was one of their most diligent, collaborative students. At the end was a line, recommended for an internal scholarship for the advanced level. I folded the letter and didn't tell him. I wanted him to hear it from the school because opening your own envelope is better than any praise. As for me, while they changed careers, I changed how I lived. I started delegating operations to Elliot and the younger managers. For the first time in years, I took a weekend day without checking numbers or making calls. I walked along the Ashley River, had coffee at a small cafe, and watched older couples hold hands. Turns out, it wasn't just them learning how to live again, I was learning how to let go. Talk shows called, wanting me to speak about a comeback from scandal. I turned most of them down. I said yes to one not to retell the past, but to talk about invisible labor, the small, quiet jobs society undervalues: janitors, prep cooks, maintenance. I said on air, no one sees them, but they keep the whole world running. I was just lucky enough to relearn that lesson not from school, but from my own children. That interview replayed over and over. But what moved me most was an email I got the next morning, just a few lines, signed by Grant. Mom, I watched it. I get it now. Thank you for giving us the chance to start over. I stared at those words for a long time. Outside, winter light lay over the city, cold but clear. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and felt as light as a first breath of the day. Our story was no longer a scandal. It had become a small guide for anyone who'd forgotten the value of work, of family, and of knowing how to begin again. And I knew the journey wasn't over, but at least the wheel was finally turning the right way, and this time I didn't have to push it alone. That year's end, when winter wind began to slip through every door crack, I looked at Caldwell Holdings' year-end summary and saw something I'd never seen before. 3 words, honor repaid, typed in the very last note line. Not an accounting term, but a private marker of mine for people paying back a debt money could never measure. Grant, Aubrey, and Mason, each in their own way, had started repaying parts of the 20-year tab I'd listed in the agreement. Not with envelopes or transfers from me, but with their actual wages and bonuses. Every month, finance sent me a breakdown, 3 small amounts taken evenly from their income sent straight to the Second Sunrise Fund. The numbers weren't huge, a few hundred, then slowly a few thousand, but steady, never a day late. Elliot called it the honor repayment. I called it my family's new breath. I didn't just watch them, I changed too. Second Sunrise, my heart's project, began expanding into 3 neighboring states: Georgia, North Carolina, and Tennessee. From a few temporary apartments, we added a network of volunteer attorneys and job reentry programs for seniors. When Elliot asked who should run community outreach, I didn't need to think. I called Tessa. "Would you help me with something?" I asked. "Tell me what you need. From now on, you'll stand in the middle of stories that haven't been rewritten yet. I trust you to listen without judgment." Tessa was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "I'll do it if you'll let me call you Mom Iris." I laughed, and tears fell before I could speak. Maybe it's quiet kindness that finally softens an old heart like mine. Grant was in a different phase. After almost a year of training, he asked to try managing 2 mid-range hotels in our system, not a flashy brand, no stars on a ratings board, but steady occupancy. "I don't want to look fancy anymore," he said in our meeting. "I want to do it right." I studied the packet he'd prepared, every little item spelled out: cleaning protocols, shift schedules, staff training. No more lines about boosting profit by cutting staff. Like the old days. "Hotels don't need to sparkle," I told him. "They need guests who want to come back." He nodded. "Now I get why you started with a broom. If you know what a clean floor takes, you can keep a whole building standing." When he left, I watched him go, my son's silhouette no longer arrogant, but steady, like a man who'd learned to walk on his own strength. Aubrey had a new start too. After last year's cook-off, she was officially promoted to lunch sous chef at the Copper Finch, in charge of menus for seniors and folks recovering from illness. I stopped by one noon. From a distance, I saw her in a white uniform, hair neatly tied, talking to staff. When she noticed me, she paused, dipped her head slightly, and waved me in. "Would you like to try the new dish?" Brown rice porridge with salmon and dill. I nodded. It was simple and thoughtful, not flashy, but every spoonful tasted warm and calm. She said, "I'm not afraid of the kitchen anymore. Every day I walk in here, I feel a little less selfish." I looked at her, my heart settling. No praise needed. I just touched her shoulder and said, "Thank you for staying." And Mason, he kept maintenance, but now as technical supervisor over all our rental housing. This time, he wasn't just fixing pipes or bulbs. He trained younger techs to check electrical systems and keep proper logs. One November afternoon, Mason came by with a small box. Inside was a card in his familiar handwriting. "Mom, Tessa and I are engaged. We want a small ceremony, no backdrop, no name placards. Just family." I set the card down, feeling like an old wound had finally healed. "All right," I said. "This time I'll just be a guest." The wedding was in early December, in the small garden behind Silver Pine's home. It was cold, but the sun was soft and warm. No extravagant flowers, no noise, just people who truly wanted to witness. I invited the director of Silver Pines and a few residents who knew Mason and Tessa. They sat in the front row beside a row of empty chairs where I placed a small sign, "For those who are gone, but never absent." Those seats were for Miss Renee, for Mr. Hector, and for my own mother, who taught me there's no debt larger than a moral one. The ceremony was simple, but beautiful. Grant and Aubrey stood at their sides, best man and maid of honor. When the music started, I looked at my 3 children and saw faces once cold, now warm, hands that once pushed me away, now holding tight to one another. When Mason slipped the ring on Tessa's finger, he said, "We won't promise never to be wrong, just not to stay silent when we are." Hearing that, my eyes stung because it sounded like a late answer to all the years silence had hurt me. After the ceremony, I invited everyone back to my place. On the old wooden table, I laid out 3 envelopes. "Before we celebrate, I want to share something," I said. Inside was a codicil, an updated add-on to my will. I made it clear, the bulk of my estate still goes to Second Sunrise, but each of you will receive an opportunity, not cash. Grant would get to run one of the 2 hotels in recovery. Aubrey would own 10% of the Copperfinch not as a gift, but as a reward for real work. And Mason, I turned over to him the project to redesign worker housing into a community complex, a project named Hector's Light, in memory of the gentleman who taught Grant chess and our family patience. No one argued. No one asked for more. They each signed, hands shaky but firm. Grant said, "We understand now. Money can buy comfort, but only opportunity builds trust." I nodded, unable to hide a smile. That night, after everyone left, I tidied my old kitchen. The white walls were a bit stained, but the light was as warm as the first day I walked in. I opened the wooden cabinet where I'd kept the only thing I never threw away, a rag. It was worn thin, stitched over and over. Every stitch was a piece of my life, years of housekeeping, nights scrubbing floors, quiet mornings at the sink to feed my kids. I set it on the table and ran a hand over it. Not to cling to hardship, but to thank the days that made me strong enough to stand. I looked out the window. City lights shimmered like 1,000 stars. I whispered, my voice lost in the wind, "Mom, I did it." Outside, the cold wind kept blowing. But in my small kitchen, everything was warm like our first family meal, like working hands, and like honor repaid with sweat, not tears. 5 years after that night at the Copperfinch, my life felt like a new chapter, quieter, warmer, full of things I once thought lived only in books. Everything had changed, but none of us forgot that night when a fancy dinner table became the place we upended the order of kinship. Now, the Copperfinch carries a name I adore, Second Chance Kitchen. It isn't a marketing flourish, but a tribute to people pushed to the margins, fired, hurt, written off as useless. The restaurant prioritizes hiring them, training them, and giving them a restart. Inside, on the red brick wall, hangs a small bronze plaque. I wrote, "Dignity is the house special here." I see it every time I stop by, and I always smile. Grant now runs 2 mid-range Caldwell Holdings hotels with a steady hand. Not a luxury chain, no stars on some list, but guests keep coming back, staff stay longer, and folks call him something simple, Mr. Caldwell, the boss who knows how to mop floors. He's not embarrassed by it. In fact, he tells the staff he started with a broom, and the broom taught him respect. Once he called me, voice rough with emotion, "I think I finally understand leadership, Mom. It's being the one who clears the path, not the one who stands in front." I said, "Good. Keep that and you won't lose your way again." Aubrey is now head of the lunch program at the Copperfinch, overseeing the entire menu for older guests. She just won a Charleston Local Star Award for a vegetable soup made from safely repurposed trim food that's not just good, but frugal and kind. At the ceremony, she said, "I used to think cooking was for people to praise me. Now I just want folks to feel lighter when they're done eating." I stood in the hall and didn't speak, just clapped, slow and steady. Each clap softened an old burn between me and my daughter-in-law. Mason now leads a technical crew named Respect Crew. Their motto, printed on their shirts, "Fix things, mend people." He says that every time he repairs something, he remembers old mistakes and realizes the thing that needs fixing isn't the pipe, it's a heart once hardened by fear. He and Tessa have been married 3 years, living near the river where the water taps the shore. They don't need wealth, just calm. On weekends, they go to Silver Pines to teach seniors how to use smartphones, so no one has to wait forever for a call that never comes. As for me, I started writing my first book, titled Mopping Hours Pay Dividends. It isn't a memoir, it's the lessons I gathered across a lifetime, from the smell of floor cleaner, from stifled laughter, and from getting back up after being looked down on. It's about how perseverance becomes life capital, the kind you can't measure in dollars, but that earns interest in dignity. All profits go to Second Sunrise. The fund has expanded to 7 cities, helping hundreds of seniors find shelter and retrain for work. When the media ask why I don't keep some for myself, I just smile, because I have enough. What I receive now isn't in a savings account, it's in the gratitude in people's eyes. My family keeps a small tradition. A monthly dinner everyone must attend, no matter how busy. Nothing fancy, nothing fussy, just the old table in my kitchen. The set dish is Silver Pine-style chicken soup, the recipe Aubrey learned for folks with tender teeth. Every time the ladle rises, celery and pepper drift into the air, and the kitchen becomes a room holding both memory and forgiveness. Tonight, at our December dinner, Grant lifted his glass of water and said, "I never thought I'd sit here. Again, Mom." I figured some cracks never mend. I looked around the table at familiar faces now, with more lines and more light in the eyes. I set the ladle down and said gently, "They don't always mend, son. But we can plant flowers in them. When they bloom, people call it dawn." They fell quiet, then smiled. No promises were made, just warmth passing around the table. That night, after I walked them to the door, I knew it was time to let the last thing in me drift away. I went back to the kitchen, dried my hands, and said softly, not to anyone else, just to myself, "I forgive you, not because I forgot, but because my children have changed." One morning at year's end, Elliot, now retired, stopped by. He stepped in with his usual gentle smile, carrying a small object wrapped in cloth. "Do you remember this?" he asked, unwrapping it. In his hand was the old key to the first Caldwell Holdings office, the key I used every day back when I hid behind the scenes, the cleaning lady in plain sight. The key was rusty, the head nicked, yet under the sunlight it shone a soft silver. "I think it belongs to you," Elliot said. "This key opened more than one door." I took it and held on tight. "Thank you," I said, "but really, you're the one who kept it from rusting." He smiled and left me with the artifact of an entire journey. I stared at it for a long time, then hung it on the wall of my new office, right under the old bronze plaque. "Dignity is the house special here." Now, as I write this, the sky is getting light. The first birds of morning are calling outside. My life, once late afternoon, seems to have another dawn, not dazzling, but warm and true. If this story touched you, I genuinely want to know who I'm speaking to. Tell me where you're watching from. Every line you share, every comment, is a heartbeat linking people who've walked through the dark. Who knows, your words might reach someone who needs a second sunrise in their life, and if you feel this journey is worth it, leave a small sign, a like, a subscribe, or simply a hello. They're all ways to let me know stories about grit, forgiveness, and new beginnings are still being heard. Thank you for staying to the very last lines. Your presence, quiet and warm, is the greatest gift to a storyteller like me. I stand up and turn off the kitchen lights. I leave only the oven light on, a soft glow like a breath, a reminder that it's never too late to begin again. Dawn once more,